Hi guys! In this lesson we're going to take a good look at an SVG based image so that we can see what the markup that describes the image looks like. So I mentioned in the introduction that we'd be using an image editor called Inkscape. So if you haven't already and you don't have access to something like Illustrator or Fireworks, I'd recommend that you download and install it now. Got it? Installed it? Okay, great. In the accompanying download for this course you'll see an SVG file called Saturn SVG. Open it up in Inkscape now. Okay, so it's a picture of the planet Saturn, and if we select it, you should find that we can resize it to any size we want without any real loss of quality, and such is the nature of SVG. Lovely. So have a little play around with it, resize it as much as you want. So this is the image that we'll be working with throughout most of the course. Some editors, including Inkscape, may have a built-in tool for viewing the XML that describes the image. So to see that in Inkscape, we would go into Edit and then XML Editor. When saving out SVG files, editors will often add a bunch of stuff that is not actually required for the image to be rendered. So these may be elements that are specific to the editor. So in the case of Inkscape, these will be these sody-pody elements. Why they're called that, I don't know. But it may also include attributes that are added by the editor as well. And these elements and attributes are added so that the last known state of the image within Inkscape is remembered. Generally, we don't need any of this, and we can look at how we can strip out all this unnecessary stuff in a later lesson. Although this is convenient, generally if we want to view the XML that makes up an SVG image, we can just open it up in a simple text editor. And we can see the same elements and attributes here. As it's XML, it's human readable, and you can get a good idea of what some of the different elements represent. So let's go through the file and take a look at some of these elements. So the file starts with the XML prologue, which is required for any valid XML document, including SVG. The root element for any SVG image is the SVG element, and it's this one here. This should have at least one XML NS attribute that specifies the contained markup is SVG. It can also have a wide range of other attributes, including width, height, ID, X and Y, the version of SVG in use, and many others. In our example document here, the next element is the metadata element, which is here. This element isn't mandatory, but it's the expected way of providing any document level metadata about the file. As you can see here, good use is made of the metadata element to specify the title, a description, the publisher, creator and license of the work. Some of these descriptive elements are based on namespaces other than the SVG namespace. This accounts for some of the additional XML NS attributes that we see attached to the root SVG element. Metadata is a descriptive element. Other descriptive elements include desk and title. When used inside other elements, they become descriptive for the element they are nested within, instead of the document as a whole. The next element that we come to, after the metadata, is the defs element. This is a container for defined content that is used by other elements, as opposed to being directly rendered. The defined content in this case is a linear gradient element consisting of a series of stop elements, followed by a radial gradient element. Gradients are never rendered as their own element in an SVG image, only as fill colors of another element, generally as shape or path. The next element that we come to is something that comes directly from Inkscape, and this is this sody-pody named view. So this is a special element, not part of the official specification, something that is used entirely by the editor itself. If we go back to the editor now, let's reopen it. So we can see that there's a border around the canvas here. So let's go back to the file. And we can see that this border is defined within the sody-pody named view. And it's things like that that the editor likes to add. The last direct child of the outer SVG element in our example image is a G element, and that should be after this sody-pody element. This is a container element used to specify a general grouping of elements. Inside this container, we can see that there are several other G elements, each containing a series of paths, as well as a path not nested within another group. They can contain many different elements, but in our example image they contain only paths. These paths are classified as graphics elements and describe the outlines of objects making up the visible image that we see on the screen. These can be filled or stroked. These elements may also contain other elements, such as animation elements or descriptive elements like title and metadata. We'll look at animation in a later lesson. If we look at the paths in our example image, we can see that each path has a D attribute. This attribute contains the path data instructions for rendering the path. The instructions are in the form of a series of separate blocks, each preceded with a letter. This letter denotes the type of instruction. For example, the M is a move to instruction, and the C is a curve to instruction. The Z means close the path. The paths may also have style rules attached, which consist of special SVG CSS like fill instead of background and stroke instead of border, as well as a bunch of other things. Also, if we take a look at the path on its own, not within one of these nested G elements, so we'll just find that, it's here. So if we take a look at this one, we can see that it's using the radial gradient that is stored in the defs element as its fill. This element is actually the main sphere of the planet. As well as paths, other simple graphical elements that we can use include rects, circles, ellipses, and polygons. None of these are used in our example image, but they are very commonly used nevertheless, and we'll get to see at least some of them in later lessons. One element that we don't see in our document, but which is pretty important nonetheless, is the A element. Just as in HTML, this is a hyperlink, and is used obviously to link to other resources. The address of the resource is specified using the xlink attribute href. The xlink namespace needs to be specified on the root SVG element, but other than that, expect these links to work in much the same way as their HTML counterparts. So in this lesson we took a look at the actual XML code that makes up an SVG image. We looked at the purpose of some of the different elements that are used, some of their key attributes, as well as the types of elements they can contain. In the next lesson, we'll look at the different ways there are of displaying the example image in a browser. Thanks for watching.